Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. I've been writing about climate for about 10 years and have seen lots of incredibly stupid stories, but I heard one on NPR which completely blew me away last night. I was driving up to Fort Collins in a huge traffic jam with tens of thousands of other drivers who were pumping life-giving carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It was a continuous traffic jam up Interstate 25 due to 5 or 6 accidents caused by stoned Colorado drivers. The local rock and roll stations, which used to be pretty good, now play mostly commercials, and I got tired of listening to them. So I turned on NPR. And NPR, of course, had a story on about climate, which they normally do. The gist of the story was that we were going to have to reduce carbon emissions or face a disastrous future of 2 degrees warming, storms, hurricanes, floods, sea level rise, everything disastrous you could possibly imagine. The picture on the left is how climate alarmists portray carbon emissions, and the picture on the right is what CO2 actually looks like. This is the coal-fired Rawhide power plant north of Fort Collins, which supplies Fort Collins with most of its electricity. Carbon dioxide is actually a colorless, odorless, essential trace gas, without which life itself could not exist. What they're showing in this picture on the left is just shadows behind water vapor, and they've tampered with the image to change the tint towards yellow to make it look like it's something toxic and dangerous. But water vapor is another essential trace greenhouse gas. Without greenhouse gases, water vapor, and CO2, the Earth would look pretty much like the moon, completely devoid of life and just covered with rock. The NPR story went on to say that not only were we going to have to reduce CO2 emissions, but in the future we were going to have to actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere, probably for centuries into the future. NPR went on to describe a promising technology where CO2 is removed from the air and then transported to greenhouses where it's released back into the air, and it makes the tomatoes grow faster. So what the process is doing is simply moving carbon dioxide from one location to another, and they're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the process through transportation and industrial costs of removing the CO2 in the first place. Wouldn't it make more sense to just leave the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in the first place and let the plants outside of the greenhouse grow faster? Life itself can't exist without greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and water. The process of photosynthesis, which makes plants grow, requires sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and chlorophyll. When all of these combine, plants can grow. And greenhouses like to purchase carbon dioxide because it makes the plants grow faster and healthier. They can feed more people. They can make more beautiful plants. Carbon dioxide isn't evil. It's a wonderful thing. We couldn't survive without it. Climate alarmists are always warning that CO2 emissions will lead to drought and famine, when in fact NASA reports the exact opposite. Over the last 35 years, due to human CO2 emissions, Earth has gotten much greener. Plants are growing faster, and we're able to feed more people now. CO2 is a good thing. These are some pictures I took this week in the open space near my house where I walk my dogs. This is the Valmont Power Plant in Boulder, Colorado, an incredibly clean natural gas power plant, which puts out no visible emissions whatsoever. The bird here is an American kestrel, one of my favorites. It's the smallest bird of prey, and I see these almost every day out there. The city of Boulder, Colorado is convinced that this incredibly clean power plant is somehow dirty. They've probably been listening to NPR. They want to replace it with something that looks more like this. The city has determined that they could power the city with less than 200 wind turbines on a windy day. This, of course, wouldn't include transportation energy uses. This would just be for residential and business electricity usage. And on days when the wind isn't blowing, they would, of course, have to purchase electricity from a reliable coal or natural gas-fired power plant. Wind and solar simply aren't reliable. So the bottom line of all this is that climate alarmists want to destroy the environment in order to save it from an imaginary menace from an essential harmless trace gas. And they think that shuttling CO2 around from one location to another will somehow prevent hurricanes and tornadoes. It's difficult to imagine how people get to be this level of stupid. One surefire way to lower your IQ is to listen to NPR on a regular basis. I just listen to them for the comedy value. I don't think I've ever heard more than 5 minutes where they didn't mention the words climate or gender. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.